So we have apparently no official representatives from Amherst, Brookline, Hollis, Hudson, Litchfield, Lineborough, Mason. For Merrimack, we have Don Tamala. Milford, we have Lincoln Daly. Nobody from Mount Vernon. From Nashua, we have Julie Chismis, Pete Kamali, Wayne Husband, Dan Hudson. From Pelham, we have Jeff Gowan. Nobody from Wilton. From NTS, John Savage. NHDOT, Linda Dusenberry, and our featured speaker, Jennifer Rizek. New Hampshire DES, Tim White. Federal Highway, Lee Levine. And from NRPC, we have Greg Lantos, Matt Wakins, Jay Mankara, Derek Stahl, and Mason Twombly. We have the Merrimack interns with us and Chris Buchanan from Amherst Complete Streets. Have I missed anybody? Okay, so we can get started with the approval of the minutes of June 10th. Were there any errors or omissions that we should take note of?
There was no changes, but I would just like to mention the first paragraph where it discusses the ability to use removed 10-year plan funds in another project. This is true, but obviously the timing would always be a concern at what stage of the 10-year plan at. It'd be easier, obviously, to make changes before it is transmitted to the gasset. I just wanted to everybody know that. Added.
Okay, so
No
did
change.
you get that, Derek? All set. Okay. Okay, we'll definitely get that in there. So, yes. Okay, so any other changes we need to make? Anybody who would not vote to approve the minutes or wishes to abstain? Otherwise, I would say that the minutes are then approved as amended. And we'll make those changes. Okay, so our main item of business today is to go over the potential Route 101 safety improvement projects. This is a TIP project, and we have on hand the project manager from DOT, Jennifer Rizek. So there was a recent front office meeting at which she presented the various potential projects, and they had the opportunity to review those, and there may be some changes coming out of that. So she's now going to go through those projects. I think there's some also potential questions on a couple of the other projects. She's managing 101A and maybe still the East Hall Street. So let's leave those to the end of get through the 101 project discussion, and then any other questions you have on other projects, George would be happy to answer those. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Great, thank you, Greg. Share my screen here. And if I can find there we go. All right. Is that up for everybody?
Yes.
All right. And I apologize for the horrible lighting in my house. So as Greg mentioned, this project sort of has evolved from a corridor study. These are the limits of the original corridor study. It started on the western end at the western intersection of 101 and 31 in Wilton and extended up through Wallace Road in Bedford. That was done in two parts with the Nashua Regional Planning Commission and then the Planning Commission that covers Bedford, but it was all done by the same consultant at the same time. That was done in 2002. We've completed two projects that came out of the recommendations of that study. One was at the intersection of 101 with Hardy and Jenkins Roads in Bedford, Then there were also some safety improvements in Milford, just west of the intersection with 101 and Elm Street. That included a two-way left turn lane. And then the C project in Bedford right now is a bridge replacement with a left turn lane for one of the residential streets very close to the bridge. There have been other improvements, not through this specific project, at Wilton Road in Milford, Walnut Hill Road in Amherst, and then Pine Hill Road and Old Manchester Road in Amherst. Those have all taken place since 2002 as well. Greg mentioned this is a 10-year plan project. It's in the 10-year plan with a scope for traffic and safety improvements consistent with the intent of the 2002 New Hampshire Route 101 corridor study. And right now we're programmed for a little under $6 million in construction, and that's in 2020 dollars. So we've kind of taken a prioritization effort knowing that there are far more needs than there is funding. We looked at locations based on that 2002 study. I had attended a meeting of the TTAC, I believe it was back in 2018. There were some additional locations that came out of that meeting that people were interested in having us take a look at. And we're looking at this really through a safety focus and then with some awareness for the budget. So we've gone through a 5-step process. We reviewed actually there were more originally. I want to say there were about 25 locations or so initially. We had eliminated the locations where there had been projects since 2002. And then from those remaining 18 locations, we looked at crash data and did a safety or a capacity analysis. Then we also identified possible locations and recommendations from based on the crash data and capacity. At that stage, based on the level of ranking, low, medium, and high, we reduced the 18 projects down to 8 locations. For those 8 locations, we went out and performed an initial environmental evaluation. So looking for any big picture things that would cause major budget or physical constraints. Then we also reviewed those same 8 locations for right-of-way, looking at what the existing width is and what the impacts might be based on the project. And then we developed conceptual sketches and cost estimates for those 8 locations. As we go through, okay, this is a graphic. It shows all of the 18 original locations. The locations that are shown in the green bubbles are the 8 that were continued, and the brown bubbles were the ones that had been ruled out. So not intended to read, but you can kind of see the rankings over on the side. So basically anything that had a high ranking or 2 medium rankings were carried forward into that narrowed down list of 8. And these are the 8 locations. We've kind of combined a couple because it just makes sense. So the first were locations 5 and 6. So that's 101 at Elm Street and at Old Wilton Road and Phelan Road. So those kind of work in conjunction. Location 7 is a stretch of road between Perry Road and Osgood Road. That's in the controlled access section. We looked at ramps coming off of 101 westbound at New Hampshire 13. We looked at the intersection with Forest Greeley Road. And then location 16, 17, and 18, we kind of lumped into one again because of the proximity. And those are in Bedford between Joppa Hill Road, that intersection, and then a segment kind of stretching from that intersection east, I think about 3/4 of a mile, and encompasses these other intersections. So I'll just kind of walk through each briefly and what we were looking at in terms of a concept and a cost, and then I have a summary at the end. So this is the intersections in Wilton at Phelan Road and Elm Street. So this is now, north is to the left. Both of these are currently signalized. This was location study 5 and 6. Right now, the level of service for the westbound traffic is an F, and it backs up all the way to the Phelan Road, Wilton Road intersection. The level of service at Phelan Road is a D, and that backs up through the Elm Street intersection. So that's why we felt that these really go together. You're not going to look at one and not the other. So the improvement that we're sort of recommending here, or that we estimated, was to add through lanes at Phelan Road and Old Wilton Road. That would add an additional through lane, and that gets you, and the traffic signal coordination with Elm Street. So that kind of improves all of the timing there. It would improve your level of service for that westbound traffic from an F down to a B. And with the 2 lanes, it would significantly reduce the queue length. Likewise, for the eastbound traffic, that goes from a D to a B. And again, considerable reduction in the queue length. So we're estimating that at somewhere around 2.8 million. That is an overlay. It does not include extending out. There's a crossing just, I guess, south of here to the right of the page. That's a bridge structure. So this would not go far enough to impact this. The next location we looked at is that segment between the Perry Road and Osgood Road overpasses. It's a close-up view. So right now, yeah, Perry Road, Osgood Road. So the intersection we were just discussing is just to the left. So right now, between the study years that we were looking at, where we had data between 2013 and 2017, there were 9 crashes that involved a second vehicle. 2 of them were fatalities. And we are also aware of a 3rd fatality that occurred in 2018. Again, this is based on the time frame that we had, but we are aware that this is an ongoing area of concern. And the person that pulled the presentation together originally, we were looking at trying to kind of get, why is this an issue there? So this is the area of the limited access highway where the 101 really bypasses the former road. Right now there are 4 existing passing zones, and this particular segment happens to be the longest and straightest of those. So then we were looking at other passing opportunities for people that are traveling this corridor. So it's 13 miles between a place other than a passing zone where you're pulling out into the opposite lane of traffic, from Bedford all the way down here to Milford, 13 miles before you have an opportunity to pass in your own lane. It's another 7 miles heading west before there's another opportunity, and then another 5 miles beyond that. And the 5 and 7 miles, I believe, are both climbing lanes, one of them going over Temple Mountain. In the eastbound direction, similar distances. So you have one opportunity 12 miles to the west and one opportunity 12 miles to the east. And there really are no other places where there's a 2-lane opportunity to pass. So our recommendation here would be to add a passing zone, so formalized lanes in each direction, ends up being about a mile, and we would be maintaining those 10-foot shoulders. The intent here was to keep the zone between those 2 overpass bridges to limit the cost and extent of construction. Even with that, and so the crash reduction modification factor, we'd expect about a 35% reduction for all types of crashes. Since we do see a lot of fatalities, we believe that there could be a big benefit in adding that lane where you're not traveling into oncoming traffic in order to pass. Just the details. And then the cost down at the bottom. So we're estimating this at around 10 million. We think that is a little high. We think it's probably closer to the 8.5, 9 million range, but this is very preliminary. We don't have survey out there, so we do have some pretty big contingencies on these estimates. The next location we looked at was location 8. That is the westbound ramps coming off 101 at New Hampshire 13. The PMQ right now is a level of service F, and it extends a good 3/4 of the way up the ramp. There's a high level of left turning traffic in this location. So the proposal would be to widen out the ramp, create a right turn and a separate left turn lane, and to add a signal in that location. That would reduce the level of service in the PM to a level of service B and significantly shorten that queue. Our expected cost for that is about $500,000. There is potential right now. That estimate is just for signals and the ramp. There is potential for that to grow depending on how much of the actual intersection on New Hampshire 13 we get into. There's not a lot of curb reveal there. There may be some other work that ends up getting rolled into that. New Hampshire 101 at Horace Greeley Road. So in this location, we had a significant number of crashes noted in the corridor study, 11, between 1996 and 2000. The most recent analysis that we could get between 2013 and 2017 only showed 4 crashes. So we'd gone back, looked at when that left turn lane was constructed. Based on our records, that left turn lane was in place prior to the 2002 study. So we're not really sure what the reduction in crashes, what the cause of that is, but none of them involved westbound traffic. So we're kind of at a loss. So the only thing we could think of to do would be to add a right turn lane and perhaps close off the driveway. We were originally thinking that some of these crashes may be caused by confusion or not understanding where the person was turning right, whether it was into the commercial drive or into the roadway. But again, none of them involved westbound vehicles. So we're not sure that there's a lot of value here. We're not sure how to solve a problem when you already have the left turn lane. If we did want to add that right turn lane, we're estimating that at about $800,000. And part of that is because there's potential for culvert work. You can kind of see the stream in the middle there. And again, potential to even get higher depending on the condition of that culvert. And then locations 16 to 18. So these were the ones between Joppa Hill Road and Elk Drive in Bedford. They were initially identified as separate intersections, but because of their proximity, you can see Joppa Hill on the left, Freedom Way and Gage Girls in the middle, and then Elk Drive towards the right. Because of their proximity, it just makes sense to treat them collectively and not as individual pieces. So there's a Mobile and Dunkin' Donuts. There's another commercial plaza sort of across from Elk Drive. The level of service for left turns through this whole section is tough. It's about a 3,000-foot section. 39 cars in the PM trying to turn into Gage Girls. 12 cars in the PM peak turning into the plaza. So what we were looking at here is adding the signals at Joppa Hill Road. That intersection was already built out with turn lanes. I believe it was supposed to have the conduit even installed for the addition of signals in the future. So that improvement could be separate from the other improvements here. For the rest, or the remainder of this segment, we're looking at adding a 2-way left turn lane where one does not already exist. There are left turn lanes at several of the drives already. So we could add the 2-way left turn lane for the Beaver Lane and some of these other sections. So the signals at Joppa Hill would reduce that from an F to a C. In theory, there's some crash modification factors that would lead to a reduction in crashes. However, isn't much of a crash history in this stretch. So while it shows a reduction, overall, it doesn't seem that there'll be a huge improvement over the current level of crash. And that we're looking at about a $4 million cost just in construction. So this is the matrix. It shows each of these. Really, we're looking at 5 to 6 because the first two are combined, and at least 17 and 18 would be combined. You can see the environmental and the right-of-way rankings have been added in here. So out in Milford, to add the through lanes, very little in the way of environmental resources in that area. It's pretty built up already, and we have a pretty wide right-of-way through that area. At Perry and Osgood, there are a couple streams and wetlands in the area. So that could be something we need to work around. But again, we have a very wide right-of-way, so little to no right-of-way impact there. The ramps, very small improvement, mostly within the existing footprint or just outside of. So again, low environmental and right-of-way. At Horace Greeley, there is that stream crossing with the culvert that we have potential to impact. And the right-of-way is a bit narrower there. So depending on what happens, particularly with the stream crossing, there could be some right-of-way impacts. It's still too early to know exactly. And then as you get down into the Bedford segments, for the signals, again, that's all pretty much in place. So that would be easy. But to add that center turn lane, the right-of-way through here is very narrow. And so we would be acquiring strip acquisitions on either side of the road to be able to accomplish that. That was not included in the cost estimate. The other thing that would lead to additional right-of-way acquisition in Bedford, all of these projects are in the MS4 project or MS4 permit area, requiring stormwater treatment of the entire pervious area, impervious area. So in Bedford, again, where we already have such a narrow right-of-way, we have to find places to treat that water outside of the right-of-way. For the other projects, we feel that there are locations to do that treatment either within the right-of-way or with fairly small impacts. And so this is the order of priorities that we're sort of looking at right now and looking for the feedback and input on. But location 7, that adding the passing lanes to the controlled access section, that's probably from a safety standpoint our number one. Locations 5 and 6, getting that additional capacity through the Elm Street 101 and Phelan Road intersections. That may have a small benefit on the westbound, particularly, and giving some people an opportunity to pass, but it's not a huge 2-lane section. The next location priority that we had identified was the stretch through Bedford, and then the ramps in Milford, and lastly, the Horace Greeley Road intersection. And that's largely just because the recent crash data doesn't support the need for that right turn lane. But there is an existing left turn. So there's some questionable benefit there. And that's what I've got.
Great. Questions for Jennifer?
Yeah, Jen, this is Wayne from the city of Nashua.
Yep.
Did you get a chance to look at the dog daycare and Camp Road intersection with 101?
We did. So on that one, let's see. So our analysis had shown that right or turn lanes from the side road would be an improvement. It's already got, I believe, left turn lanes from 101. And that signalization would probably not be warranted due to the low volume on the side roads.
Jennifer, related to that similar location, I believe LaBelle Winery has approval for a pretty big expansion that will be across the street from, it'll be on the north side of 101. Was that considered? Because I happen to live in this neighborhood as well. And making a left off Camp Road is brutal if you need to turn, and I know it's low flow, so I appreciate that. I just wait patiently, and a lot of people will turn right and then you turn somewhere down. But I'm wondering with LaBelle expanding, that's just going to get even worse.
Yes, and they come out of the dog daycare thing, and you do the same thing. You wait to turn left there forever and ever. Many people just turn right, and they go down, and they try to turn around at the farm stand on the left, but they sometimes that's roped off, so they have to go even further to turn around and come back. It is the side street traffic is very heavy.
So I don't know where that is in the drive approval process. I mean, the town can always require developer improvements if they feel that that's necessary. I don't know where they are in the drive permit. This prioritization started about 2 years ago, really trying to address the outcome from that 2002 study. So we have not, this isn't a new corridor study for the area.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I know one of the concerns with, and I don't know if somebody from Amherst can speak. I didn't go to any of the public hearings on LaBelle, but I know that there is some anticipated increase in traffic. It's like a wedding. It's going to be a big wedding venue. So it'll be, event related, but I just think, I don't even know what you would do. I just wanted to put it out there that there is a pretty big development going on there in the very near future, which was not in the part of the 2002 corridor plan, obviously.
No, because I don't think the winery existed in 2002.
Yeah, Jen, this is Wayne again. Being somewhat familiar with the corridor, because I travel it just about every day, I just think if you look at the side street traffic at Camp Road and that dog daycare center, you're going to find a lot more traffic than you do at Joppa Hill Road. I don't know if it's the timing of the counts or what, but I believe you will.
Well, this is Jay jumping in. I think I'm not specifically familiar with Camp Road or the dog daycare, but my overall thought is both the recommended projects and the prioritization seem reasonable to me, and I think prioritizing in particular the section where we have the high rate of crashes on 101, where the no passing or I should say the limited passing areas are. And in particular the fatalities, I think having that as a priority to me makes sense. And as a second priority, the intersection with Elm Street, that also to me just inherently makes sense. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I know that there is somebody participating today who's very, very familiar with crashes in the area. So I don't know if Chris Buchanan, if you feel that you want to make any comments. I'm reluctant to call anybody out, but I know you probably have more familiarity from the safety perspective than most other people on the call.
Thank you, Jay. I don't typically attend these meetings, so I'm not exactly sure the appropriateness of my participation, but I appreciate the venue. I would just point out, for those who don't know me, I'm a fire captain in Amherst. I've been in the fire service for 13 years here. And my very first car accident was a multi-fatality accident on New Hampshire 101 back in 2007. If there's uncertainty as to why these accidents have been occurring, it seemed like it was a little difficult for that to be ascertained during the study process. It's very consistently two things. The first thing is that we, especially during the, there are two different portions that we recognize in this area, serious fatal accidents. And one of them is the limited access portion, as the limited access portion typically receives standard highway level speeds. However, there is no physical separation by direction. Therefore, we receive head-on collisions with frequent regularity from Milford well into Amherst when that limited access portion ends. In my 13 years, I have seen one of those accidents occur due to somebody passing, but I've seen dozens of accidents, including numerous fatal accidents, occur merely by the fact that somebody has crossed the double yellow line, as there is no physical barrier, and you have a collision, a resultant speed of well over 120 miles an hour, as people typically go 65 plus miles an hour along this portion. I would say that I understand the desire to add passing facilities along this. However, I would say that far more relevant to safety needs in the area would be physical separation by direction. I can see people adding passing facilities at some point. However, if it were an or statement, if we can have one or the other, by making it physically impossible for head-on collisions to occur along the limited access portion, that will directly save the lives of several people. It just will. and there's ample information. I don't know if maybe some of our municipal data doesn't get to the New Hampshire Department of Transportation, but we do have not crash data, but fatality data about this. The second portion that was discussed is the not limited access portion going towards Bedford, largely in Amherst. And the same problem persists there. We see that people are, I don't know what speed they are going when they collide, but what we have are the same types of incidents, including at the Horace Greeley intersection, where just in the last 2 years, I've seen several of these types of collisions. People are crossing over the W line and getting into head-on collisions. There are various reasons for it. I don't claim to know what they are, but it is physically possible because of the roadway configuration. And I would just very, very, very strongly encourage you to pursue physical separation by direction. The 2002 corridor study emphasized this as a priority, as well as additional access controls to consider making this portion all limited access. I'll get off my soapbox now. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, Chris, especially as our Amherst TTAC members are not with us today. So I'll talk about the budget issues. Jennifer, we talked about this a little bit. If you add up all these project costs, they come out just a wee bit higher than what's programmed in the tip, but you had said that you thought you could scrape together some funds from other projects.
No. So we have the 6 million right now. Of those projects, I'm going to back up here. So of the projects that we're looking at, they would all fall within that other than the passing zones.
Right.
If that is a priority for the regional planning and the communities to look at that area, and Chris, to your point, we have not ruled out the possibility of putting some sort of median treatment as part of that project. We would be looking at trying to find ways to come up with the additional money. Again, we don't think it's quite 10 million. We think that's a little bit high based on our preliminary estimating sheets. Otherwise, we would be looking at projects that add up to no more than that 6 million. So we could potentially do 1 or 2 locations if we combine the others. But for this 10-year plan project, I would not expect it to be either more than the 6 million or more than that segment 7 to add the passing lanes.
Any other questions for Jennifer? Would you be able to send us your presentation? We could share with others. That'd be terrific.
I guess I may also speak to Chris a little bit with the separation, the corridor study. He's correct, did talk about median separation with a 4-lane, was basically a 4-lane divided highway. The costs obviously associated with that are quite large, and we've not seen the traffic growth that was anticipated in that corridor study. So I do understand you have concerns, but especially in the limited access portion or the non-limited access portion, the feasibility of closing that access is pretty difficult. We typically do not have medians on 2-lane roadways, but in the limited access section, that could be a more realistic goal to achieve in that area, just because, as you mentioned, the nature of the highway and the speeds that people are traveling there.
Can I have a quick follow-up?
Sure.
I have my doubts that it has traffic flows that merit a 4-lane highway. I really just don't think that those projections in 2002 have come to fruition.
Correct.
It's merely the safety factor of making it a divided highway. So if a 2-lane divided highway configuration were ever a possibility, that seems as though that would achieve the safety benefits while not altering the need for any sort of flow improvements.
Yeah.
And all of our speed data that we've aggregated from the NPM RDS data set bear that out. And the way we're projecting traffic growth in the future, we don't see any serious degradation of speeds along the highway.
So I'll get you a copy of this presentation, Greg. Anything else before I go?
Okay, we
Really,
really,
I just wanted to thank you. I thought that was a really great presentation. Sorry, the only thing I mentioned was LaBelle. I didn't mean to focus on a negative, but I thought it was a great presentation and very informative. And I'm really happy to see this project getting some traction after a number of years. So thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
we all echo that sentiment and very appreciative of your presentation and providing some definition to the potential future projects. Thank you. And with that, we'll move on to our next topic, which will be turning to the 10-year plan project category weighting criteria. And Matt Wakens has been working diligently on that, and he'll present the results of your votes.
So hold on here. So you can hear me, right, Craig?
Yes.
Good, and you can see the
clear.
screen. And you can
Looks
see
great.
the screen.
Yep.
Okay. So thanks. So yeah, continuing the discussion about what is going to next round of the 10-year plan, 2023 to 2032 10-year plan, the project selection criteria. I think you're going to remember that last month I reviewed the updated criteria. We asked for some feedback, and there was a little, and then we explained that we needed a TTAC to help determine the relative importance of each of these criteria to transportation projects in the region. So with that in mind, after last month's TTAC meeting, we sent to members a link to a 1-question survey asking you to rank the criteria from most important to least important. And this table you see there is an attempt to help explain the results of that survey. So 9 people chose to participate in the survey. So columns 1 and 2 basically list the criteria and how they ended up ranking. So you're going to recall that those are their criteria: safety, mobility, network significance, state of repair, natural hazard resiliency, equity, environmental justice, accessibility, economic development, and support. Several of these are new since in this round. They're new criteria. So that's the order they were ranked. So that's 1 through 8, 1 being the most important. Third column, is basically the average the average of kind of first place votes, second place votes that each individual, of each individual's kind of voting in this. So for example, for safety, you can see the average was 1.33. And what that means is that it got probably 4 or 5 first place, votes for being number 1 and several for being number 2 and so on. And so that averaged out to 1.33. And in a similar fashion, the rest of the criteria averaged out like that. So, so we use those averages to calculate the relative importance of each of the criteria to the region, and we wanted the highest ranked criterion to have the highest weight. So basically, so we did some mathematical calculation here, and what that 1.33 ends up representing is a 21% of all the possibilities. So what that means is that weight is 21% of what is, at least for the people that responded to this survey, that's how they think safety should be weighted, 21% of the possibilities. And then in a similar fashion, you can see that mobility and network significance both had identical averages, which came out to each 15% of the total. State of repair came out at 3.78, slightly behind the previous two. This is rounded, obviously, to the nearest whole number. We could go out to one decimal point. But for the purposes of this table, I just rounded. And so state of repair is also 15%. Hazard resiliency and then equity essentially were the same percentage of the total. And then economic development and support were equally approximately 8% of the total. I went back, so the last column says 2018 weight, that's from the previous round, 10-year plan round. I looked back to see how the weights then compared to the weights we just came up with. So safety back then had a weight of 25% as compared to 21% this round. Mobility was 17% previously, 15% this round. Network significance came out around the same. Previously, state of repair was a weight of 20%. This round, 15%. The next three were not, we didn't include in the previous round. So, there were not, so we don't have a weight for those. And then finally, support 2 years ago was 15%, and this time it's 8%. You'll notice that last column does not add up to 100%, and that's a combination of that we have, there was kind of apples and oranges. Those three criteria were not included, and in previous criteria, alternative modes has that's been removed because we incorporated alternative modes into the other criteria. So it's represented in the various other criteria. So that's how staff at NRPC weighted your rankings. So, if anybody has any questions about that, I'm happy to answer. So there's that. This next table, you need to remember that all but one of these 8 criteria has sub-criteria. So those criteria need to be weighted as well. So again, first column are the criteria, second column are the weights we came up with. And then the third column is divided up to, to each of the sub-criteria and then the criterion weights at the end. So for safety, and again, staff went ahead and did this. So previously, safety hasn't changed. It has the same sub-criteria. Last round, it was pretty similar weights, pretty close together. So we just chose to make them equal in this case. Mobility, that category, that criteria has kind of changed. Some things have been moved out of it. So it kind of was apples and oranges, but so in this case, we chose to just, again, make these two sub-criteria equally weighted. Network significance is also, those are pretty much the same sub-criteria as previously. And so we chose to keep them approximately the same. So traffic volume is 5%. Facility importance is going to be 10%. State of repair is a little different. It only had, there was no sub-criteria for state of repair. And I think last time it was 20%. So this time around, at least for now, and this is open to debate, by the way. So the state of repair, that part of the sub-criteria is actually the condition of the pavement or the condition of the facility that is going to be improved through the proposed project. So we think that, that's probably has, the condition of that road segment, for example, probably is more important than the maintenance part. And the maintenance part of state of repair is the notion that doing this project might add to the maintenance responsibilities of a community or New Hampshire DOT, for example. But, so we chose to to weight the condition of that facility higher than the level of maintenance it might add once it's built. So natural hazard resiliency, last round we didn't have any projects that were in this category, which is part of the reason we didn't use it. But anyway, this time around we are including it. In this case, the sub-criteria are the risk that natural hazard, proposes, perhaps to a culvert or what have you. And then, so the project would be, what's the level of risk at that facility? And then how does the project mitigate that hazard? So, seems like that could be evenly weighted. So that's what we did. For equity, environmental justice, and accessibility. So the sub-criteria are so equity and environmental justice that's about the vulnerable population that this whatever the project is addressing. And then accessibility is the one example would be the universality of how accessibility is going to be improved for that vulnerable population. So again, it seems like those could be evenly weighted. Economic development, so that's about, the two sub-criteria are local and regional, and what that means is, how does this project contribute to a local or a regional economic development project, for example. And then freight movement is how does the project, ensure efficient freight movement within the region. Again, this might be up for debate, but we chose for now to evenly weight those. And then support doesn't have any sub-criteria, so that just stays at 8%. So again, this is, if people have concerns about that, we'd love to hear them now, or we can certainly take, input and feedback offline, and in September when we reconvene, we can certainly, debate these weights. We can debate these weights, the sub-criterion weights, or anything about this process you want to talk about. So does anybody have any questions so far?
Matt, this is Wayne Husband. I just have one comment.
Okay.
The weighting and stuff all sounds good as far as what you presented, but I think that some something has to be done to make sure that the weightings aren't masking a deficiency. In other words, if the safety element is so bad that something needs to be done sooner rather than later, a 20% weight might mask a really unsafe condition. That kind of stuff. So it almost seems like there has to be exceptions.
Yeah, we've discussed this before, that obviously there are some projects where, one criteria such as safety is overwhelming, and a good example of that would be the Exit 5 project, that was in the last round. So, we wrestle with that, but we're supposed to come up with some overall weighting criteria. The good news is that these weights and the scores that result do not determine the actual ranking of a project. They give us a guideline, but the TTAC has the ability to review project, and municipalities can rank their own projects within their town in terms of their priority. We do it at the TTAC level, and then ultimately the MPO makes the final call. So we're not locked in by what these actual scores come out to be. There's a lot of flexibility, but these are a required part of the process, and so we do them, and we take them into consideration, but they don't fix us on the ultimate ranking or prioritization scheme.
Sounds good. Thanks, Greg.
Matt, so I look at this, I just have a question about the EJ. So the top score ranking there, equity and environmental justice, is that looking at the actual numbers, or the neighborhood that's being impacted, sort of the potential to impact? I'm not sure how that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, for example, would the project provide transportation infrastructure benefits to an identified concentration of the various vulnerable populations? Would it expand transportation choice, or enhance alternative modes?
Okay, so it's set up like mobility, where you look at the overall need and then how much it accomplishes of that. So the one other thing that we need to take into account, there can be negative EJ impacts. If a project
Right.
impacts a neighborhood in a negative way, that overwhelms any positive aspects that they get from improved accessibility. And
Right.
obviously this happens, maybe not so much in today's day and age as back when there was a lot of highway construction going on and whole neighborhoods were just being ripped down without any say-so.
Indeed.
But we need to think about how that would impact the scoring in a negative manner.
Well, I could probably answer that. I have one more page to show here, and again, if anybody wants to comment, we can go back. But this is a page from the guidance that I reviewed last week. There've been some adjustments, but this is about the actual scoring. So keep in mind, we're going to end up scoring a project, then we multiply it by those weights, right? So here are these are the scoring procedures. So again, a score shall be assigned for each criterion. Criterion scores should then be multiplied by the criteria weights. The weighted criteria scores should then be summed for a final project score. RPC should make reasonable attempts to assign a defensible score to each project for each criterion. We're not going to, I don't know if anybody remembers from last week, but there was a proposal on the table in the draft criteria that criteria will be skipped. If they weren't if the criteria just wasn't relevant, but we came up with a way to that would have added a bunch of work. And so we kind of had a workaround on that. But anyway, we can talk about that in a second, but if a defensible score cannot be developed for a particular criterion due to data or information limitations, RPCs can use their best judgment to assign the score and record any other relevant data or information limitations. So if a criterion is irrelevant to the project, score of 1 out of 10 should be assigned for that criterion if it's irrelevant. So that, I know I kind of get off track with your question, Greg, but that addresses this notion of skipping criterion. So anyway, so.
Right, and I know there is a score, a 0 for a negative impact.
Right. So,
but
okay.
although it's not scaled, so it's not like is a 0 is a 0. You don't have a -5, and theoretically, you know, probably won't happen again. But there could be a project that just has such an overwhelming negative impact on, you know, a particular EJ zone that it would, you know, not show up. You know, sort of getting back to what Wayne was talking about, you know, masking the impacts because of the scoring system. It would have to be sort of dealt with off, you know, aside from the actual score it might get.
Yeah.
Not likely to happen.
Yep. Well, that's why these are only guidelines. We can, you know, address that if
Right.
that happens. But so kind of finishing up on this scoring. This subcommittee kind of set up that there'd be this notion that there are project needs and project impacts. So there are two kinds of criteria when you see this you know when this criteria is finalized. And again, so the criteria that assesses the need for a project is one type of criteria, and criteria that assess the impact of a project. And here's the example. When you're talking about safety, there'd be a history of crashes at an intersection, and that's about evaluating the need for a safety improvement project. And then while looking at the crash modification factors that Jennifer mentioned for 101, you know, for those modification factors for these improvements, they're about the impact of a project on safety. So this is the kind of the way that would be kind of incorporated into scoring. So you can see for a project need, the scale is, you know, basically 1 to 10. 1 would be a minimal or no impact, and a 10 would be a very high impact. And that's if you're, you know, if you're looking at the side of the, you know, the proposed project, that's talking about the need for the project, and that's would be a sub-criteria. And then on the impact side, which is would also be a sub-criteria, there is, you know, you can, in this case, we said a 0 would be a negative impact, and then 1 would be minimal, and you know, 5 would be moderate, and so forth. So, you know, that was a way for incorporating negative impacts into this scoring process. And then that last column, again, as far as the relevancy of a criterion that might not, you know, for a project just might not apply, we, instead of skipping criterion and reweighting all the others, which we're not going to do, it's just, if it's not relevant, it gets a 1. So that's what that's about. So that's what I have for this whole process of scoring projects that will be pouring in to NRPC later this summer. So any questions or thoughts on that? Okay, so and if anybody offline wants to talk about it, that'll be great. And you know, we can talk about it again if anybody wants to in September. So that's what I have, Greg.
Okay, and so while Matt and others on the subcommittee were working on the scoring and ranking criteria, there was another group working on the development of project submission forms. So I've been promising these to you for a while. I checked in with DOT. They still didn't do the final, but I think they are and will be approved by executive directors at their monthly meeting tomorrow. So we hope to get them out to you right at the end of the week. Promise this time. So if, you know, following up on last month when we gave you the opportunity to talk about your projects, if there are any project updates or further information you'd like to share at this time, we'd love to hear about it. Or you could just choose to wait until you submit the projects. I've believe we would like to have these submissions completed by the end of the month. Would that create a problem for anybody? They're going to be relatively simple to fill out. So I guess that doesn't create any issues. So that's good. All right, we'll move on to our updates. Matt, did you have any minor revisions you wanted to go through?
The only one I think that's just a quick question, and people can jump in. But the one, there was an issue, I think, on the project on East Hollis. There was a question of funding in 2025. I think it's been listed as non-par funding, and as I understand it, that's not accurate. So, and I think Jennifer is the project manager for that one.
Yes.
So, not to put you on the spot, Jennifer, but can we get that straightened out or what have you?
I think Jennifer left.
Okay. Well, I don't know if Linda has some input on that.
I just looked in the 10-year plan, and the non-par is in the 10-year plan. I think Jennifer would be the best one to answer the questions. I'm not sure. This
Okay.
is 5, so it's not stiff years officially, but we still want to find out what it's for. But I think Jennifer would have been a good one to.
Okay. Well,
This is Julie. I just want to add, I have talked to Jennifer about this. We did a little research, had to go in the Wayback Machine because this project has just evolved just a lot. It was one project, it was two projects, now it's back to one project. At one point, we needed the non-par to fully fund, but then we had more money. So it's just, we have discussed it, and I think we at the city have determined that there is no longer a need to have that in there, especially since we don't even know what the design is going to be anymore. I mean, I know it's going to be pretty close to what it was like in 2010 or whatever the last stop point was, but I think the city is pretty confident that we don't need that non-par anymore. Sorry, that was really wordy. I just want to let you know that we have talked to Jennifer about this.
Great. And all the 101A questions, I guess, were resolved?
Yeah, actually that was 101A. 101A is the one with the non-par that needs to come out. The East Hollis Street, we just had a question. It was an inflation issue. So I think that's resolved as well, and we are back being fully funded on that.
Very well.
Thank you guys for helping out, straighten that out.
you're welcome.
Okay, I guess we can move on. Any municipal updates?
No, this is Wayne. Greg, I'd just like to thank NRPC for all their support with the traffic counts and speed studies. We couldn't keep up with some of this stuff without you guys, so thanks.
Oh, we're happy to do that. Oh, it reminds me, you know, I'm trying to keep track of the turnpike system numbers. We had reached a trough of nearly 58% back in the days of April, and it's been creeping back. Actually made some very substantial progress, and now it's kind of still inching back, but not that fast. So as of the week of July 5th, the turnpike is down 21.5% year to year. So let's see if we can crack through that 20% barrier and continue the traffic recovery. Because where there's traffic recovery, there's economic recovery. And it also helps us out in our transportation planning program if we can get back to normal on that. Okay. So moving on then, any updates from NHDOT?
Well, recently we just had a NTS meeting with Nashua and the Planning Commissions with the DOT on the FTA 5339 grant that you received. And then afterwards, I received all the new grant information NTS was up for. And I was trying to think of a way to make those funds more flexible, to increase in minors or full amendments. And you have 3 projects that are NTS 5339. You might want to look at possibly combining them all together. That's one thought I had to make it more flexible for the 5339 funds. I want to, I don't know, talk to FTA, what they think, but I know the DOT has one 5339 project, and having the 3 projects individual makes your threshold for a minor not as flexible as it would be if it was all in one project. One project, those 3 would be like $3.5 million. I was just, yeah.
This is Julie. I don't think we'd have a problem with that, but I thought that the idea was that we were supposed to do the transit projects by funding source, and so that is 5339, but it's programmatic 5339 versus the discretionary 5339, the B and C. I mean, if it's okay that we combine those, if that's okay in DOT land, I don't think that NTS, I would have to double check with Camille and Louise to make sure that would work in trams, because we would likely need to see those specific C and B pieces in the STIP and TIP, because that's how the grants are opened. So, I mean, it's definitely worth anything that we can do to prevent this situation from happening again. I think, you know, we are open to. We just have to make sure that we can make it work with trams and FTA as well.
Yeah, maybe somebody should discuss that with FTA to see what they think about adding that all into one project. I just thought the FTA 5339 was one type of funding source.
Yeah, they're different. The regular 5339 is programmatic. The B and T are competitive, discretionary grant funds. So they are handled a little bit differently.
Any way we can work this out, you know, for this particular project is great. But the larger issue is that, you know, we want to ensure it doesn't happen again, and that STIP revision procedures don't, you know, cause a project to, you know, it's not going to happen for months and months as a result, because, you know, obviously that has a detrimental impact on the important population that we're trying to serve. So, you know, it's something I think we can work with the, you know, the federal agencies on in our P4P meetings, and, you know, if we can build more flexibility into the process, that would be a good thing.
Yes, I agree totally. I know our program just says capital plus and bus facilities. It doesn't say discretionary or formula funds, but I don't know. So talking to somebody from FTA, I think would be the best start.
And I guess we were looking for FTA to, you know, issue a waiver at the meeting, and, you know, they didn't feel that they just had the authority to do that. And I'm not sure. There should be flexibility in these processes.
There should be. I mean, we've got a nice grant, and it's unfortunate that we don't have the flexibility. And I was just trying to think of any way we could do it.
So all the MPOs are now aware of this, and it will be coming up in our future meetings. Hopefully we can work towards a solution. So I'll move on to DES updates.
Hi, Greg, can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
I don't have a whole lot this month. Maybe I could just mention that June 3rd was the deadline for submission of proposals for the State Clean Diesel Program. It's the second round of funding for fiscal year 2019. We actually had a really good response. We received 16 proposals. There was one from the NRPC region. So we're having a look at all the proposals right now and scoring them. And hopefully we're going to be able to let the applicants whose proposals are being selected for funding, we hope to let them know about that sometime this month. So that's really all I've got for this month. Thanks, Greg.
Okay, I do have a question for you. So for our Nashua UZA MOU that we're developing, one of the things that we need to put in is the provide 4-year performance targets for the total emission reduction of carbon monoxide. Okay, this is a performance measure we need to add on. This is not something that's in the SIP, and probably because I think the SIP precedes when the performance measures really started.
Mhm.
When I talked to Nate Miller about this, and he thought that Nick Alexander actually would have this, but I just want to confirm. So this is not something that DES is in charge of developing?
Not to my knowledge, Greg. I can look into that a little bit more for you,
Okay.
but
And I'll check with Nick, and
yeah,
Nate's probably right on that, because we don't have any such performance targets for ourselves, regionally. All we can do is adopt the state or develop a regional one by applying a VMT prorated factor to whatever the total is, I guess. Okay,
Sure.
so that answers that.
Okay.
And then finally, federal highway updates.
Hi, Greg. It's Lee here. Don't really have any updates, but thank you for the work that I know you're doing on the agreement that you just mentioned. We appreciate that. And, keep us in the loop on that, and let me know if you have any other issues that come up. And also appreciate hearing about the 10-year plan weighting criteria. And I was able to be in on some of that discussion, and requested that folks consider the, speaking of performance measures and targets, consider the applicable federal measures and targets as part of that process, which was incorporated. So thanks for inviting me to be part of that process. 10-year plan has no federal standing, so there aren't any requirements ascribed to it, but because it becomes part of the STIP, the STIP, and even the MPO long range plan, to some extent, it's great to be able to participate and to have those federal performance measures considered as part of the process too. So thank you for that.
So I'm trying to wrap up that second draft of the UCA agreement at the end of this week before I go on vacation for a week. And I thought, in addition to sending this to you and to FDA, at this point, I also circulate it to the DOT, DES, and the transit operators in New Hampshire, but not to send it to our Massachusetts counterparts at this time. Wait till it's kind of finalized here. Does that sound like a reasonable approach?
Yeah, however you decide would be best, as long as they are involved in the process at some point.
Well, of course, they'll have to sign it, obviously,
Right.
but I just, I don't want to be sending them multiple rounds of material to look at it. If we can kind of get it settled here, not let's thought first with Federal Highway, but at this point, probably share it with the others as well. And then when we're kind of settled on it here, send it down to the Massachusetts agencies. So we'll handle it that way.
Okay.
Okay, great. So that's our complete agenda for today. Would there be any objections to adjourning at this time? And I'll mention that we're planning not to meet in August, so we'll come back as a group in September, and at that time we'll have more for you to look at in terms of project scoring and so forth.
Just real quick on the project scoring, I couldn't get myself off mute quickly enough before. I was thinking that maybe the better way to do that is to do the scoring as a ratio of the total applicable points. So if you've got a scale of 100 and you have two categories that aren't applicable, and that is 9% of the total score, then you score the project and you do it as a ratio of 91 instead of as a ratio of 100, and that'll give equal weight to all projects and not lower a project score based on the fact that a category wasn't applicable. And that's more true than giving it a 1 when the maximum score that it could have gotten was, say, a 5.
So the way we did it, I believe, as I discussed with Matt, so being ranked 1 to 8, the sum total is 36. And so we just reverse the order because we want to assign the highest score to the number 1. So number 1 becomes 8. So if everybody ranked say safety is their highest, then it would receive an 8 out of 28 share, and it got somewhat close to that because most people did rank it one. I think 2/3 of the people did. And so that's how we developed it. It's just the pure linear scale.
I don't think that's John's point. I think his point
No,
is,
it's the applicability.
right. I think that's a very good point, John. That makes sense.
Yeah, so if you have a category that's not applicable to a project, and you just arbitrarily assign it a score, you either make that category now higher weight, because if you arbitrarily assign it a high score, well, then now it's higher than it would have been. And if you arbitrarily assign it a low score, then it's lower than it would have been. And what you really should do is take that, whatever that category is, out of the calculation and do it as a ratio of the total applicable categories. And then you'll have a weight for everything, and everything has that done to it, even if something has all the categories applicable.
Well, that was the reweight option that was, talked about, but that's, at that point, you're starting to play games with the process because you're saying, well, we don't want to count this if it doesn't have an impact.
No, you're taking that out of it by making it a rating that if there's a category that's not applicable, that category no longer affects the total score. So I think you actually make it statistically more sound instead of less sound.
Okay.
Yeah, John, I feel like that's what we did before when we had categories that weren't applicable, like, trying to assign a facility importance, a traffic volume on a new road. You don't have one. So it's kind of hard to assess that, or to a non-motorized, where it just doesn't pertain. And I feel like, I think it was Jen Sis had come up with, it was when I wasn't there, but it kind of like just reset the, instead of 100 points out of 100 points, now it's out of 80 because 20 points aren't applicable.
We always have a traffic volume for a new road.
Right, from the mod. I'm sorry, that was a poor example. Let's say a non-motorized facility or something else where it just doesn't pertain. But because there are some that just don't, depending on the project.
Well, we do have time.
You can certainly make a number. I mean, we can use a parallel facility and make an assumption and assign something, but that's a little more fuzzy in the, as to John's point, that's a little more fuzzy math than just saying, okay, well, we don't want to just, throw high volume on this so that it creeps up in points.
Right.
Yeah,
I think that's a good approach. I think the instances where something isn't applicable won't be common, won't be frequent, but that's a very rational way of approaching it in those circumstances, I think.
Plenty of time for us to have the conversation over this. The main thing is we want to get these submission forms out to you so you can get started on your projects, and we'll figure out the other stuff as we go along. But we will be in touch. We take your comments into consideration. Now we'll work them through and get back to you. Okay, anything else? Then I will declare us to be adjourned, and we'll reconvene in September. Thank you all.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, bye.
You.